So that's the new intro.
Wow, I was going to say, that's amazing. I feel like I'm watching a TV show. This is so cool.
Wow. Well, gotta learn this tech sooner or later, right?
Love it.
Well, good morning, Mary.
Good
How are
morning.
you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fabulous. So, everybody, I want to introduce Mary Osborne. Mary is an occupational therapist, and her specialty is dementia care.
Yeah.
And let's see, I think I've got it. I'm going to put it down here on the bottom. Mary, her company is yourdementiatherapist.com. Do make sure to check her out on every social platform that there is known to man, because Mary is there. And she is the Instagram queen. So if you are on Instagram, please check out Mary. She's got tons of videos and clips of strategies and tools and things you need to know if you have a loved one with dementia.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. Thanks for having me here today.
Yeah, this is fun. This is fun. So when Mary and I were talking a couple weeks ago, I brought up the idea of talking about accessibility, but accessibility in a slightly different way than, the word's been thrown around.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking it because it came up with one of my clients that are the folks we serve, you being the dementia community, me being the stroke community, especially the aphasia community.
Mm-hmm.
How do we help our families and folks get out of the house?
Yeah.
If they've become isolated, or if there was an incident that happened out in the community that caused them to not want to get out. So I thought we'd pull back the curtain and you and I just talk about it and let everybody kind of see how we go. And I'm sure we'll get some tips and tricks out of it.
Yes, for sure. This is such a great topic because there's so much overlap with what you do and what I do, and we can bring both of our perspectives to the table. So yeah, I'm excited to speak with you about this.
Do you have an example to kick us off with?
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about an example related to COVID, because I feel like this is definitely like a prevalent concern. And even still, I do feel like family members struggle with this, with their loved ones being really skeptical and fearful because of COVID and the community. And something I actually dealt with a lot, I would say a lot, like over the past 2 years, right? Once everyone was getting back out in the community, and COVID is still prevalent in the community and still a fear of most individuals. So for me, it's really thinking about like, how can I help minimize those fears of COVID for that person? Like, what would they be agreeable to do? And this is such a tough topic because this concern of COVID, it's so valid, it's so real, but it's really about thinking about how we can decrease the fear associated with COVID and being out. Are there certain steps that we can take to help with this? Can we find a reason that is motivating for that person to get out? So I'll bring up a situation of a client that I was working with whose significant other had dementia, and this person was really reluctant to get out into the community because of COVID. And they actually had this big family event coming up, and everyone was really nervous about it, right? Because they were like, well, how are we going to get this person there? They're very skeptical of COVID in the first place. Like, how is this going to happen? So, how can I make this a win-win for everyone? But also take into consideration the person living with dementia's fears. We had a table separated from everyone else. We had a mask available. We had noise canceling headphones because these settings can be a little intimidating. Having a backup ride just in case that person, only wanted to stay for a certain amount of time. So it's about thinking about how can I make this a win-win for everyone, and think about what I can do to set up the environment in a way that can help everyone involved. I want to hear an example that you've encountered.
I'll give you a recent example. The gentleman I work with, he has significant aphasia and he's wheelchair bound. He can walk in, a bit, use a walker, but for the most part, he gets around by a wheelchair. And the thing about it was, they always had to host the family or friends to come to their house because it was accessible. But that's also a lot of work on the spouse all the time to host people, and that being the only way for them to socialize. Then they had a family member buy them a portable ramp. 16 pounds, folds up, the wife can move it around, and it's got a 600-pound capacity.
Yeah.
Well, then we start talking to my client about it and breaking it down into steps like, how can we get used to it? And it came out that his biggest concern was his wife's safety and her not getting injured. Before I tell you how that turned out, how about you and I kind of talk about how would we break down that situation?
Yeah.
So just in summary, they go out in the community, but they're isolated in the house. So when they want to get together with family and friends, everybody has to come to them. And he seems to have a concern about going out because of it. And she does too, about accessibility. Are there handrails? Is there a ramp? Is there a level entrance? How are we going to get to the bathroom? What if there's clutter in the house or, 100 throw rugs? We've all been in the houses, and I love all my clients, but, throw rugs are not your friend. If we were going into somebody's house for the first time, what are some accessibility things we need to talk about?
We need to figure out the concern, or what is that person having difficulty with. So figuring out what is impacting their ability to safely getting around the house or getting out into the community. And this is where I think it's so important to have like a team of therapists, right? A speech therapist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, and the doctor, especially with a new diagnosis of a stroke or dementia, right? So we can get in there and figure out like, what is this person able to do now? What are some concerns? What are some things that they're experiencing difficulty with? So then we can perform that assessment on that individual. And then that not only helps that individual, but helps the caregiver understand better, like where their person is at and what kinds of things we recommend.
So we absolutely need to know where our person is functioning. So let's go through the process. Let's say you and I are walking into somebody's house for the first time, and we're looking at it through the eyes of clinicians, and how are people going to access that house?
Yes.
So even starting out in the driveway, starting out at the street level, let's do a house assessment and talk it through. So the wife pulls up to the house and her person is in a wheelchair. What does she need to be concerned with first?
Yeah, getting into the house. We need to figure out how to make that accessible. Is it currently accessible? How are they performing that? What does this look like? So seeing where are they at, both cognitively and physically, because these are two very important pieces of the puzzle that we need to figure out, that we need to assess. Yeah.
So let's say the driveway is flat. She can back into the driveway, and then easily, there's a walkway that leads up to maybe one step entrance to the house. And then there's that lip, once she's on the porch, then there's that lip to get into the doorway.
Yeah.
So let's say she can use the ramp. They successfully got up the ramp. They are in the front entryway. And luckily for this house, it's level. No step downs or anything. It's level. But let's paint the picture. There's throw rugs. There's lots of pieces of furniture. What would need to happen? So I'm going to take it from the perspective of the wife. The wife managing her husband who's in the wheelchair, and she's going over to a friend's house, or maybe it's a relative. She needs to know what that path is from the front door to the living area, whatever room they're going to hang out in. And then she needs to see where the bathroom is. How can she navigate that?
Yeah.
Like, Brenda, you want us to come over, but I know your house is cluttered. I know your house is cluttered and there's too much furniture and there's throw rugs and,
Maybe she can check it out beforehand if she hasn't already and kind of see what that space looks like. Maybe it's measuring the doorways and making sure, like, if the individual did have to use the bathroom or she had to help the person to the bathroom, what this looks like. Can you easily get in and out? Different things like that, and just kind of seeing what the accessibility looks like in that house.
Yeah. So how do we start a difficult conversation?
Hey, I would love to come over. I just have to make sure that this area is accessible for my loved one, that we're able to easily get in and out of the different doorways. Like, what does this look like? Like, I just want to make sure that this is a good situation for both of us, for all of us, because I don't want to get myself into an unsafe situation. So there are just different things that I have to take into consideration whenever getting my loved one out and about.
Can we talk about bathroom accommodations? Let's talk about it from the perspective of maybe someone who has dementia, without getting too deep in the weeds, but what does a caregiver, a spouse need to think about for bathroom needs for someone with dementia if they're going to go visiting?
Yes, that is so true. So this is a great question, actually. And my number one thing, I am such an advocate for occupational therapy. I'm like, if a change in status has occurred, if it's a new diagnosis, and even throughout the diagnosis, you're going to notice a progressive decline, because with dementia, you're going to have that decline throughout the stages. So it's really about just kind of recognizing where that person is and seeing if we can get an occupational therapist involved to further assess the environment and seeing what they can recommend to make the bathroom as safe as possible. So that's something that we do actually whenever we go in. We assess like physical strength, we assess cognition, we see how the bathroom is set up and different things that we can do, like would grab bars be appropriate? Would an elevated toilet seat? There's so many different things. It has to be like individualized. It has to be individualized for that person, right? Because not every person living with dementia is the same, right? Everyone's going to be different and they're going to have their own needs. But it's about seeing like where that person is at and what they would need in order to help their situation, to make their situation better, and also the caregivers. And also when we go in there, we can help train the caregivers on like what the safest way to get this person up and down is, how to use the equipment. So I think the equipment just depends from person to person. And it also depends on what the bathroom looks like, right? Like, are they going to have to remove the threshold around the door to get the wheelchair in, or whatever assistive device they use? There's so many different things to look at, which I think an individualized approach is so important in these situations. Would you say so too? Like, especially from like a speech therapist, because you can assess the cognition of the individual too, right? Like, and how they're communicating, and see how that all fits into the equation, right? Like,
yeah. Communication advocacy. That's like a whole other 5-hour show. But, I think about the stroke survivors that I've worked with over the years, especially, when I did a lot of home health care.
Yeah.
And helping families plan ahead. So let's say our person in the wheelchair has gotten into the house or visiting a friend's house, and they can do some basic transfers, that kind of thing. Give a perspective of the different things that might need to be considered. I know we always want to individualize, right? That's we don't paint with a broad brush when we work with our folks.
Yeah. I think it's just kind of meeting that person like where they're at currently and making the environment as safe and accessible as possible for where they're currently at. The goal is to help maximize their progress and their independence and help with getting them back to like how they were prior to the stroke.
Definitely. So I think if we kind of sum up a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, first off, whether it's someone who has dementia or someone who's had a stroke, if they're going to get out of the house and try new things, first we have to figure out what the fears are.
Yes. We have to identify the fears, and also what is the goal of like the caregiver and the person, right? Like, well, oftentimes you'll see a lot of reluctance from the person living with dementia, maybe getting out in the community because maybe they realize something is different, and the thought of being out in the community and socializing with other people is something that adds to the fear and anxiety. So there are so many different things, but yes, definitely identifying the fears and also like the goals, right?
Yeah. So fears, concerns, goals. And I think that's a good place to start. So if, like you were talking about when we started off, you were giving the example about, the person with dementia was invited to a family event and they really wanted her to be there. If you haven't been out and about for a while, it's really important to do little outings and start building up success, building up confidence.
Yes, because it's like yes, it's not always going to be a straight win, right? It's not always going to be like you get to the biggest goal that you have set for yourself. We all want that to happen, right? But we know that it takes these little baby steps to get there. And also like celebrating the success of these small steps that we're accomplishing and achieving along the way, right? So yeah, like, sorry.
No, it's not. No, it's good. I mean, it's an interesting topic, and more so than ever, I see it from the perspective of the spouse or the caregiver, because I hear their stories.
Yes, for sure.
So let's see, setting realistic goals.
Yes, yes, and that leads us into that, because if you've identified the reason why they're reluctant to perform the task, then we need to make sure that the goals we're setting are realistic, right? Like for some people, it may not just be going straight into thinking, how can I set up the environment for success with this big outing, right? It's like the little things along the way. So maybe it's just taking a walk outside with a family member, or maybe it's visiting their family member at their house, right? And maybe getting outdoors there. It's just like these little things along the way that are going to help improve the chances of a successful outing into the community. That is because that's the main goal. So
I think time element is something else that families need to consider. It's not just that physical accommodation, or equipment or strategies and knowing what they can do physically.
Yeah.
With someone who has dementia, and it's the same with the stroke population. People wear out. People have different amounts of endurance.
Yes.
Different thresholds for frustration and just auditory visual input.
Yes.
How does a caregiver determine when their loved one has dementia? What are the signs of somebody getting overwhelmed or frustrated, or like, time's up, time to go home?
Yeah, I think it's about, not doing everything all at once, like putting that person like your goal is to get that person out into the community. Well, not going straight to that community outing, but seeing how they do with like shorter periods of time. Like I said, like maybe you go to a family member's house and you're there for maybe like an hour or two. Well, how did this person do in this situation, right? Were they okay? And then maybe next time, once they're at that family member's house, bringing more family members there and seeing how they react to maybe 3 or 4 people versus
there you go.
1 or 2 people.
I like that.
So kind of, doing these small little things and kind of seeing like how their endurance is, like being out, and maybe socializing for that amount of time. And then also is how they do with that sensory stimulation. Like, was it okay with maybe 1 or 2 people, and maybe with like 3 or 4, it's just not happening? Like, let's kind of see how the situation is going, and we'll go from there.
I love that. So I think one thing I want to make, I'm all about like charts. I like the visual, like organization. So I wonder if you and I will put our heads together to help people. Like once you overcome like an entry, then you need to think about, what's the cognitive endurance like? What's the time? So it's like time times how much stimulation there is. Like, don't go to a coffee shop at prime time in the morning when it's crazy. So you go when it's quiet. Because someone with a communication impairment, most cannot tolerate a lot of that extra activity and input.
Yes, for sure. That's a very great, because that just made me think of like a situation where this person went to a restaurant, but it was all about they were still kind of, paranoid about COVID, but we figured out like a time when that restaurant was the least busy.
Perfect.
They had outdoor seating. So then that alleviated the fears associated with like COVID, and also kind of like helped provide like a less like overstimulating environment. So
there's just an awful lot of thought that has to go in. and you can see, and you and I can relate with our caregivers and how overwhelming.
It is. There's so much to think about. And like, I know I'm thinking about different situations as you're like talking about them too. It's just so much to break down in different steps. But I think the main thing is, like you said, like first we need to identify the fear and the goal, right? And then we need to talk about like setting these realistic goals, and maybe we have a goal set, but then we have to modify it along the way.
Right.
Sometimes that happens too.
A, B, and C.
Yes. And I think it's about like, I think as human beings, like we tend to be very hard on ourselves when we have this set goal and like that's just not happening. But it's realizing that we can always just modify that, and meet that person where they're at and just kind of, modify that goal to help everybody win. And that way we're celebrating that small success and those small achievements.
Amen. Small wins
small wins are everything.
They are. And I also want to throw in not to be judgmental. If you have a goal set for your loved one and you don't achieve it exactly how it is in your head, that is not failure. So
no, it's not.
Focus on what worked, make your adjustments, and then try it again the next time. But you have to, there's just so much planning that goes into all of these outings. But how important is it, Mary, for our folks to interact with others?
I think it's really important, right?
We all know, right? When we were all doing COVID, we were all locked in our houses. That was really, really, really hard.
I know. And COVID has kind of changed the way that we socialize, and I don't know, it's just so different now. But I think it's so important if we can bring the socialization to somebody in a different way, whether, if they're not quite ready for that community outing, like how can we bring that socializing aspect to them, right? Like is there friends that could come over to our house and hang out?
That's right. So, at the right time of day for the right period of time. So if people do come over, say, 2 hours is about the maximum. And, I may have to kick you out sooner, if my person is getting too tired or overwhelmed, whatever the steps may be.
For sure.
But identifying that. Well, Mary, let's wrap it up. So I think we have to, if we kind of summarize, identifying fears and concerns, pick one task, break it into small steps, know what your person's limitations are as far as time, their physical abilities, and what kind of equipment they need to have.
Yes.
With them. Celebrate small wins. Try again. And I believe that people need to write things down. It sounds silly, like we talk about all this like journaling for self-care, but I think journaling for caregiving could really help provide objective information. Instead of having it just kind of rolling around in your head. I know for myself, like I'll miss some details.
For sure.
If I write it down, have you ever, I'm guessing you've taught this to your families.
Yes, because then you'll start to observe patterns, right?
There you go.
Even let me give you an example for someone who doesn't have dementia. Like my dad recently had a compression fracture and he was in a ton of back pain. So I told my mom, hey, let's write down morning, afternoon, and then bedtime, his pain, sitting down and then moving around, and like, let's track it and see if we can see a pattern. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Is it staying the same? So then we can report back to the doctor, like what's going on, right? And she was like, that's a great idea. I didn't think about that. So just thinking of different things that we can do, like if whatever the concern is, and trying to track it and seeing if like what works, what doesn't work. Because then you'll, like I said, you'll start to see patterns of what's going on.
I think it's great. Any other practicing for success? That's important.
Yes.
And having a support network.
Being flexible too, right? Like if something practicing, but yet like being flexible that, this may not work right now. This may, like the main goal that we're trying to achieve may not work right now, but hopefully we can get there. And if not, we'll have to modify.
Yeah. All right.
I love that.
So, Mary, can you tell folks where they can learn more about you and the programs you offer and how they can follow you on social media?
For sure. So you can follow me on social media, Your Dementia Therapist. It's on all platforms, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I have a lot of articles on my website as well that go through all about dementia, anything and everything. So y'all can search on there as well. I have a workshop that I recently hosted live, and that was Unlocking Hidden Resources, where I went through all the different medical professionals and just some different resources to think about throughout the stages, how to introduce healthcare professionals to the person living with dementia, because that's a common concern that I hear from caregivers. It's great that we have these resources, but how do we get this person to the doctor? How do we introduce a caregiver? So I go through the different examples in my workshop, and I have some ebooks. I have my course, which I'm currently in the process of redoing what's offered in the course. So I will have that available soon, but because I know this is streaming, I think is this streaming on my page as well?
I'm hoping. We'll find out afterwards.
This is the first time we're doing
repost it. I mean, that's the other thing. We can repost it.
Okay, cool. And then tell everybody a little bit about what you do for my readers who are listening.
So I'm Genevieve Richardson. I'm the owner of Life Speech Pathology and Life Aphasia Academy. So my specialty is serving typically folks with a left hemisphere stroke who have any kind of speech, language, or cognitive issues after a stroke. But I also work with any other diagnosis that impacts the brain. If it impacts speaking, listening, reading, writing, communicating, those are my peeps.
And you do this through virtual visits as well, and you accept insurances, right?
Yes. So I am I'll say 99% telepractice, because if somebody lives close to me, I'll at least try and see them once in person in their own environment. But everything is telepractice, which allows me to take my specialized skill and experience and reach them through Zoom and the miracle of the internet into their home, so that people don't have to settle for a therapist that doesn't have extensive skills, especially in a chronic language condition, because aphasia doesn't go away in 6 months when someone's discharged from the rehab process. It takes years. And if people want to keep getting better, if they have goals that they want to achieve, have better connections and communication with their loved ones, my practice can serve them. Help them reach those goals.
You have changed so many lives, and you're just such a great resource for everyone to know about. So if anyone is listening to this, they have their loved one who's had a stroke, definitely reach out to Jen.
We are. So a couple other places for resources. So this live streaming thing is relatively new. You are my second live guest.
Oh, cool.
And then what happens here from this live, we're going to have one every week on Thursdays at 11 Central. Doesn't matter if it's daylight savings or not, 11 a.m. And then this content plus any extra handouts we have will be available through my podcast, the Listen for Life podcast, which also releases on Thursdays. So the podcast will be 1 week behind the lives. And that's where people can sign up and subscribe. I'm actually going to pop up. Let's see if I've got it here. For anybody watching, there's a cute little QR code up in the top left corner. So you can hear the podcast every week, by subscribing through Apple or Spotify. But if you want extra content, the transcripts, the summary, the take-home messages from these episodes, you can only get it by subscribing to the podcast, and you'll have access to the content downloads. I tend to make a lot of ebooks and journals and workbooks that kind of go along with these episodes.
Amazing. Yes. And I've listened to a few of your podcasts, and they're great. So
it's a lot of fun. There's great topics, and there's so much more to cover.
I forgot that actually we did one together.
Yeah, we did. I think you were number 10. So as of this week, I'm at 35.
Oh, that's amazing.
I know, A+ for consistency.
Yeah. I actually like the idea of doing these kind of lives with you, because it's kind of like back and forth. People get to see a little bit about how we brainstorm through specific situations, like what we've done for past clients, rather than, just like a quick little video that is produced on Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And I think as you and I, because you and I, we talk all the time.
Yeah.
That's what people don't know. We talk all the time. Mary and I, we were introduced by a mutual friend, and, and we're like two peas in a pod. We're cut from the same cloth. She's doing for dementia what I'm doing for the aphasia community.
And it's so cool.
Later on this year, I'm going to have a course available. I just need a few more hours in the day to keep working on that. And Mary's course, everybody, I've seen Mary's full course. I've seen her webinars. I've seen her mini courses, but her full course about dementia, Mary, just tell us real quick. It goes through all the stages of dementia, everything a caregiver, spouse, loved one needs to know.
Yeah. And then
what else can you tell us?
Yeah, so I go through the different stages, and then I go through some different helpful approaches and like the final bonus episode of it. So it's a really great resource for caregivers. And I am just the type of practitioner too that I want everyone to be informed of like the symptoms that you may come across throughout the stages, but also like how can we focus on abilities to really help that individual living with dementia thrive, So my mission in this world is just to spread more awareness on dementia, but also talking about all the different things that we can do to help bring purpose and help focus on quality of life. So, and I know that's something you're very passionate about too. And I just love seeing different providers in their niche, and I love seeing the passion behind what we do. So I think it's really cool that we're doing this work in the world and helping other people. Yeah.
And meeting like this, we could literally do a round table. We could have a variety of professionals on.
That would be great.
And we could talk through cases. So anybody watching, anybody listening, if you have a topic that you want covered, whether it's through me or Mary, or we need to pull in somebody else, let's do it. We are always looking to serve and give information. And Mary and I have a great network here in the Austin area and beyond Austin.
Yeah.
So
this would be really great. It would be great to get like a physical therapist involved, like maybe a nurse. I don't know, some different disciplines and kind of
for sure.
The situation.
We need a grief counselor. We need to talk about hospice.
Yes.
So there's a lot of good things to come. This is not one dimension. What we're trying to accomplish here. We're trying to support the community, support the caregivers and their loved ones.
Yes, for sure. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary.
This was fun.
All right, everybody. Here's the outro. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Oh, that was